Hello and welcome to this tutorial on ConfigMaps and Secrets. When I think of config maps, I usually think of config files. For example, if you had an Nginx web server, you would have an nginx.config that would set up the environment for you. Now you can have multiple Nginx containers, let's say, but then each one of those containers have a separate config map which contains a config file. And then by extension, you would have multiple Nginx web servers all running different configurations. It's actually a great way to do dev test and prod, because then you can make changes only to the config file and not have to recompile binaries and your entire containers to run separate workloads. So that's an advantage there. When I look at secrets, I consider them primarily anything that I needed encoded, and that could be a certificate key, password, license, that kind of thing. So those are just the categories that I usually go to first. Config files, obviously config maps, secrets, anything that needs to be encoded. Now they could both be mounted as environment variables or files, and so I prepared two quick little demos today to go through what that would look like. So the two demos we're going to go through today, one is on Maria database and the other one is on Mosquito. So let's go ahead and quickly take a look at those. We go to, we'll do Mosquito first, and we'll cat the deployment. And you'll see that this is just going to set up a simple container. I'm not exposing any config maps or secrets at this point. We're just going to jump into the container and have a quick look. First thing I need to do is create a project. OC new project. And then in that project, we'll go ahead and set that deployment. OC create F deployment. Okay, let me clear the screen. And we'll do OC get, OC get all, that's fine, all that's fine. All right, so here we can see our pod running. And let's jump into that pod and have a look. OC exec IT. All right, so now we're on that file system. We can see our Mosquito directory here. So we'll get into that. And under this directory, there are three other directories. So we've got config, data, and log. And if we take a look at the config directory, we'll see that there's a Mosquito configuration file. And if we just cat that, we'll see that there's nothing really enabled in this file. It just is all the remmed out options to run Mosquito. Okay, so what we've got here is an environment that's all set up that we can now expose a config file and secret to and build our configuration and then rerun it. So let's go ahead and get out of that. All right, now let's take a look at our config map. And here we'll see that it's a config map, but we're calling it the Mosquito config file, and we're going to be writing this data. So this is the file that it's going to actually write out, Mosquito config. And if you remember just a second ago when we were in the config directory, that's the name of the file that we're going to be replacing. And inside this file, we're going to write this data. Okay, so let's go ahead and apply that. OC create config map. All right, now let's take a look at the secret. And here we've got the name Mosquito secret file, and we've just created some encoded data, and we've provided it a file name as well. So now we're going to mount this file name, and we'll just put in this data. And this is, I can't remember what I put here. See, echo that to base 64 decrypt. There we go, some awesome secret file. All right. So let's go ahead and create that now. Here we go. Okay, now let's modify our deployment to take advantage of those. So we can look at deployments. All right, and we'll get to the bottom here. Now, the deployment is for the pod, and anything, and you can have, well, you can have multiple containers in a single pod. So we want to make sure that our configuration is going to be taking effect to this container here only. So we're going to look at the spec containers, the container name, and then anything under that name is actually what's going to be used as our configuration for Mosquito. What we're going to first do is we're going to create some volumes. And I've got this off screen just so you don't have to see me type all day. So we've created our first volume here. We're putting this under container. Now it's under containers because we're exposing it to the pod. And then later on, we're going to make a reference to it inside the container to connect to the volume. All right, I don't know how that happened. Let me go back there. All right, so now we've got our volume. Mosquito name is the Mosquito config file. We're looking at the config map. And the config map name was Mosquito config file. Our next line is going to be the secret. Same thing, a new volume, Mosquito secret. It is a secret, and then we have to define a secret name. So you can see it's the same thing, a name. And this is what we'll reference when we build our container volume path. And then we've got what it is, a config map, the name, and then the name of the config map. We've got the name, we've got the secret, because it's a secret name. This is different than the config map, and then the name of the secret file. Okay. Now if we go back to the containers, we've got these two volumes exposed to the pod. Now we want to make sure that we're accessing the mounts within this container. So the first line is just simple volume mounts. If I can copy that from my text file off screen. Volume mounts, and volume mounts is going to be lined up underneath the name of the container that we're affecting. And then we're going to go ahead and paste in our Mosquito config information there. So now we've got volume mounts, the name of the volume that we're going to mount to it, Mosquito config, which is right here. And then the mount path where we want to put the file is right there. So the file that was referenced inside the config map, that mosquito.config, will be written inside this directory. Okay, so let's look at the next one. Here we go. So same thing, name, Mosquito secret, referencing this volume here, and then the mount path for that secret. And I think that was just secret.file. So we should have a file written into that directory. All right, now the config maps and the secrets need to be loaded first. We've already done that. Now let's go ahead and apply our changes to our deployment. Before I do that, let's jump over here so we can see that, yeah, deployment pod, config maps, oh, it's there. Okay, good. Okay, so now our deployment's been changed. We can see that there's a new pod spinning up. Let's see OC get pods. All right, so this is our new pod. Let's go ahead and jump into that and take a look at it. All right, same thing. Let's go to the Mosquito directory. And now we can see that there's a secret directory already created there, or also created there. This is referencing the path that we dropped our secret file into. So let's just list the secret directory. And sure enough, there's our secret file. And if we cat that, we'll see it's some awesome secret file. All right, so now let's go into our config data, or our config rather, and then we can cat the Mosquito file, and you see that this file has now been replaced with the data that we loaded from that config file. Make sense? Great. Okay, so that's Mosquito. And that's mounting config maps and secrets as volumes and files to your container. Okay, so let's now try the Marion database. And if we look at the files in the directory, we'll see a config map, the deployment, secret, and the service. And if we start with the deployment, so we'll cat deployment. And this is just running a regular Marion database. If the image name is MariaDB like this, then generally that means that it's going to pull the image first from the Docker Hub. If you've had experience with running containers on OpenShift before and you've pulled down a package from the Docker Hub, sometimes those images don't run. It's because OpenShift applies a lot of security by default, like containers cannot be run as root. Now, before you get overly frustrated about trying to rebuild containers, I would recommend you go to the container images on Red Hat's website. They provide a lot of containers already available to run on OpenShift. So again, using that previous example of Nginx, we could do a search, and here's a bunch of versions of Nginx that will run on your environment. So I would recommend you pull down one of those. We're going to do the same thing with the Mary database. I'm going to grab this one here because I want a rel 8 image. When I select there, we can see that we have a lot of information about how to use this between options of environment variables. And then to get the image, we would just go here to get the image. And then you want to put in the registry and the repo and image name, and it'll look something like this as your image line instead of that. All right, so we'll do that when we get ready to load this. Until then, let's take a look at the other files. So we've got secret, let's cat secret. Under secret, we've got two key values. So we've got the first one is username. So if we look at username, it'll provide this key or this encoded value. When we put in this as the key, it'll provide this value. And then if we look at service, we'll see that we're creating a service exposing port 3306. And under ConfigMap, we're saying the DB host is the DB service. So essentially we're going to be pointing using an environment variable to point the config map to the service to enable these ports. Okay, hope that made sense. It probably makes sense when we write it all out. So let's take a look at the deployment. Go down here under the container name, because we want the environment variables within this container. We'll do environment. And then first things first, let's go ahead and drop in our MySQL username. I do have this off screen again, just so you don't have to see me typing all day. So we got our value there, MySQL user, come here, value here, MySQL user. And again, it's looking at that secret, it's pulling out that key username, and then it'll provide the value for that username. And then under MySQL, or we'll do the MySQL password. Okay, so it's looking at the same secret file. It's looking for this key, pull out the password, and provide that value to the environment variable. And then we'll grab our next one. It is MySQL root password. And I'm just going to use, you don't need to use a root password. It also has it as an option here. You can also use something like MySQL allow empty password. But then you'll have to pass in some sort of value like yes to get that in there. Also, they recommend you put in MySQL database name. If you don't, it's just going to create a default database name for you anyway. So I think that's fine. All right, so now we got 3 secret values. Let's go ahead and put in our config map value. All right, so this is our DB host. And if you remember, our config map pointed to that service, and that's essentially what we're going to be doing here. We're pointing to the service that we're going to start that exposes that port 3306. All right, so let's take a look at that deployment file one more time. There we go. Oh, you know what I didn't do? I talked about it, and I didn't change the image. So let's grab the image name. Okay, that's in there now. All right, so let's create a new project, clear. Come back over here, OC, new project. DB. Then here, we'll go ahead and create all of the supporting configurations. OC create F secret config map service, and we can jump into MariaDB here. We'll see the service was created, config map was created, and there's a bunch of default secrets in OpenShift, but the secret for MariaDB was also created. All right, so let's go ahead and do our deployment. OC create F deployment. There we go. So our pod's starting up. OC get pods, and it should start running no problem. All right, looks like it started. And I believe we can even hop into it. And pull up our environment variables. And let's grab these. So here's our environment variables, password, password. Our username was username, and the Marion, or the MySQL root host, refers to this service. So OC get all, and we'll see that the service is running, everything is up and healthy, and we would be able to make our database connections to that. So this is it for the tutorial. Again, what we've covered is using ConfigMaps and Secrets as both files that could be mounted and as environment variables into our environment. I will include the files that I've used in my GitHub. Please check that out and follow me on GitHub. And I will also put links below for the Red Hat container images as well as the GitHub link. And feel free to comment, share, like, subscribe. And until next time, thanks a lot.